From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast.
The fastest growing entertainment phenomenon of this generation.
I, Prophet of Esports, joined today by my friend and co-host William Collis.
Yeah, we got the book of esports out. It's a big deal.
So everyone knows me as the Prophet and William as the Professor.
They may call me the Prophet, but in my life outside of the business of esports, I have worked on the investment side of the table for the better part of the last 2 decades. The single fastest growing area of gaming and esports is gambling. It's booming right now. You don't need to be a prophet like me to see that. However, as an investor, I've stayed away from gambling and betting companies because of the reputational risk and often shady nature of the companies involved. This was true until now. I've recently bought stock in a new public company called Esports Entertainment Group, or EEG, which is focused on esports and gambling. The big difference that changed my mind is that EEG is a public company, NASDAQ listed, and fully regulated, focused on esports betting. The regulatory and audit requirements of a public company are key in my mind to provide the needed transparency for players, bettors, and investors. I had an opportunity to host the CEO of EEG on this podcast a couple of months ago, and I was very impressed by his vision for the company. We've stayed in touch, and I'm delighted to announce that they've accepted to become a sponsor of the podcast. If you're a family office, institutional investor, or investor of any kind, really, Esports Entertainment Group, ticker symbol GAMBLE, GMBL, might be one of the best ways to get exposure to the esports betting space and gaming in general. Make sure to check them out at esportsentertainmentgroup.com. Having said that, I need to make sure to state that this is only my opinion. I'm not an investment advisor or selling stock in the company. Please make sure you do your own research and seek advice from a licensed professional if you're looking to invest in the field. From the keyboard to the boardroom, this is the Business of Esports podcast. I am Paul Dewalibi. I'm joined today by my friend and co-host, William Collis.
Hello, hello.
For those of you who are new to the podcast, welcome to the official podcast of esports. What we do here is we cover the most pressing gaming and esports topics and news of the week, but we look at all of it through a business and C-suite lens. We dissect, we analyze the business implications of everything happening in this industry. For our regular listeners, thank you guys for tuning in every week. Thank you for all the 5-star ratings and reviews. Thank you for telling your friends about the podcast. This is how we grow. If you haven't already, tell your friend about the podcast. Go leave a 5-star rating and review. And make sure you go buy William's book, The Book of Esports, on Amazon. And right there, you've got like your esports education. That, like, listening to all the podcasts and buying the Book of Esports, you've basically got the foundation of an esports MBA.
And the live streams.
Every Wednesday evening, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time.
Yep.
William, how you doing this week?
Paul, I had a very, I think it sounds like we've both had tough weeks, but I'm very amped for our podcast. I think it's going to be really fun. I love recording these things. It's just a good time.
Yeah. Speaking of tough weeks, I will just remind people that we are hiring at the Business of Esports. And I literally need to hire like 10 people yesterday. So if you're interested in writing, content creation, on-air hosting, if you're a software developer, literally just about anything you could possibly imagine in terms of roles, please look me up on LinkedIn. We're looking to hire great people. And if you're in New York City, that's even better. That's a huge plus. William, have you been playing Valheim, by the way? I actually, just before we started recording, someone messaged me saying Valheim hit 4 million downloads.
Well, Paul, I don't know, Paul, because I'm waiting. There was supposed to be a server invite coming my way with quote unquote hand-me-down silver armor. And I've just been sitting in this, literally just sitting on the main screen. Just wait. I just think any minute now it will come. But
So can
I
I
don't
say?
know, Paul.
Let me just say something. So
Yeah.
the dedicated server is set up. I've been running it, right?
Yeah.
I've had so little time to play. To be honest, I barely even slept, let alone play. But the little that I did play on Saturday, because all the guys I play with, most of them are so far ahead, and they've been grinding like 20 hours a day this game. When I logged in, first of all, they had an entire like set of the best armor and the best stuff for me ready to go, which was nice. Second of all, they had killed all the bosses except the very last one. So basically, I logged in, and in 2 hours, I had all the best stuff, and we killed the last boss. and then, in fact, what's interesting is in the battle against the last boss. Obviously, a bunch of us died, and I got killed in that final battle.
No.
But my stuff disappeared. My body with all the stuff on it disappeared. So I was like, well, that's one way to go out. I completed my Valheim experience.
But it's at 4 million. I mean, that game is unbelievable as a runaway phenomenon,
It's massive. Massive. I mean, I don't know if they'll continue this. They're saying they're going to put out new content. I love to see it, right? Like, I don't know.
I love to see it, but here's what always concerns me about these is just can you keep up with the pace of content consumption? I mean, this is why you need AAA studios and 100-person teams, right? Is like, look at how fast your group is blowing. I mean, how long have they been playing Valheim for? 2 weeks? Like,
I mean, they were waiting on each other, right? Like, if it was just if it was just a couple of them that like played it 20 hours a day, they could probably have blown through all the content within like 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Well,
here's the thing though, right? Like, in my mind, it's totally shameful for the AAA devs should feel some shame here. This is a 5-man studio. Like, come on. And Cyberpunk was it's Valheim's a just objectively better game than Cyberpunk. Like, how does that not put AAA developers to shame?
But it's interesting because, like, I mean, let's be honest, like, sorry, I know we need to get into podcasts, but like, is it? Because like, it's so interesting where this is, I think, something that's really important about games that I think sometimes we miss is like, look, is graphically Valheim incredible? No, they've done some nice things with shaders and light bloom and stuff to dress it up, but like, I don't think anybody looks at that and goes like, wow, that is the best looking game of all time. And it's just one example, but it shows you like what really matters in games is the gameplay. It's why Nintendo can keep re-releasing games from 15 years ago and be like, oh, great, I'll buy Super Mario World again. Oh, handheld. Oh, done. It's really interesting. And I think the reality is so much of AAA dev goes into all the other things which do enhance the experience, right? You would rather have your game have better graphics than none. You would rather have your game with full voice acted dialogue instead. But the reality is, like, the core game design principle, I think what we're seeing now is you can achieve great fluid gameplay because the game design tools are so democratized with smaller teams, right? It's just, and that is most of the story in a successful game,
William, before we're going to jump into news here, I just want to show you this because I know, especially when it's just you and me, you of all people appreciate this.
Yeah.
And it was an article. Even the you talk about graphics in Valheim.
Yeah.
This was an article from PC Gamer, and the headline here is someone built Sauron's tower in Valheim, and it's enormous. And for those who are listening to the podcast, it is spectacularly beautiful, this tower that they built. But I love the sub headline here, which is, now that's what I'm Tolkien about. So a good pun, William, for your sake here, for your enjoyment.
Since we're talking about publishers with good news, right, and all the positive talk about Valheim, this is the other thing that broke. I think it broke in an hour before recording this, but Anthem, they've canceled Anthem Next. Basically, have you seen this?
No, I have not.
Like, you can. I think it was just an article that was posted to the Bethesda blog. But like, Anthem, it's basically like, they've essentially said they're not going to continue to invest into the, which I think is really interesting because that's a whole nother school of thought. We have this, the flip side to the coin of the success of Valheim is what happens when you've invested so many resources in a AAA title and you want to repair, right? And you want to repair. And that's the really interesting thing for me, because it did seem like we'd crossed a threshold where it was actually, because all these other things were so expensive to do, it was actually economical for developers to double down on a game that maybe didn't have the launch they wanted to recoup. Good example of that is Fallout 76, right? Which my understanding is it's actually a very good game to play right now. Not a great launch, but held the course, solved the problem, right? It's interesting to see, maybe that's, I was wondering if this was actually going to be a trend that you were going to see, that like the AAA games were so expensive to do that they were like, literally, they would not fail. Like they would
Yeah.
just like almost, and because you see it in movies now too. Like the other thing is with the Justice League and the reshoot that's coming out, Zack Snyder, it's a similar story. There's so much marketing and dollars and brand building and star power poured into these things. Like it's weird. Like you would have never seen this 15 years ago, but like second chances are coming into these marquee genres just because the investments are so high in the properties. You have to rework them if they don't pilot,
Yeah, it's but to me this is perfect example of sunk cost fallacy, right? Like this is perfect demonstration of this at work. And I don't think there's anything that's going to save Anthem.
Well,
let's jump
now
into
that now there isn't. It sounds like yeah.
Let's jump into this first story, William. I know you were excited about this one.
Mhm.
And it's, look, this is a game that you could argue maybe never went away.
Mhm.
And this is from Yahoo Finance, and the headline here is: the Starcraft 2 nerds at Shopify now have an esports team. And the article here talks about how, for those of you who don't know, Shopify is this e-commerce platform. So if you want to start a store online,
Canadian e-commerce
Canadian
platform, right,
company.
Paul?
Yep,
Mhm.
yeah, it is. Probably one of the biggest sort of tech success stories in Canada in the last decade. And the CEO, this is not in the article, but the CEO previously had said he's a big StarCraft 2 fan and StarCraft 2 player. And in fact, part of his hiring practice was he liked hiring people who are gamers, especially StarCraft 2 gamers. And so they've now recruited top tier StarCraft 2 players, and they've unveiled their own esports org, even though Shopify is not connected to esports like in any way, right? This is not an esports team. This is not a company producing esports content, right? Like they have no business currently in esports. So this is sort of out of left field. I'm curious, William, what you think of this. Like, are you excited about a company that's doing nothing in esports just starting a team?
Well, there's quite a lot of stuff going on here, I think, right? I think so first of all, I want to actually talk about the name of the team, because it's the Shopify Rebellion, right? I
Yeah,
want to say.
Shopify Rebellion.
So my understanding is this is actually fitting into the Shopify corporate strategy and messaging, because Shopify is
Correct.
billing itself right now as arming the rebels, right? Which
Against
is
Amazon.
against Amazon. Yeah. Their whole positioning right now is essentially basically, if you're a third party seller today, you have it's Amazon, right? And their whole idea is you don't need to go to a corporate store, you can set up your own independent store. And so this, my understanding is very marketing and marquee story led, right? Because you basically have to convince people to not be on an Amazon platform. And the way you have to do that fundamentally is better tools, better stuff, but also traffic funneling, right? It's like a traffic funnel story. And so this is a business that I think, to have been successful, has a history of relatively novel marketing tactics, because it's essentially, it has to survive. It has to be, it doesn't have default eyeball aggregation like, say, the Amazon practice does. Now, my guess here is, first of all this is to say, so why esports? Like, why would you go into esports? But we've seen plenty of examples of esports teams that, in Korea at least, that have affiliations with companies, right? It's absolutely not unusual to see, say, like, South Korea Telecom, sponsor SKT, right? SKT, right? So we just haven't seen this very much, in North America, Europe. But in principle, if you think the demo is a good fit, right? And you are willing to you're willing to expend the attention and the resources to build out the beachhead, I could see it making strategic sense, right? Just like it makes strategic sense for Gillette to sponsor a stadium, right? And that's a huge economic outlay. Why not this here? My other piece of understanding too is I think there's esports fans in the Shopify management team, even for, I think, the game they launched with StarCraft 2. And
That's
so
what
I
I
think
said. The
part of
CEO is
that's right, the
personally
CEO.
a big fan.
Yeah, and so perhaps too, there's a story of, this is an easy marketing expense to greenlight, because people like the game. Why not? You can justify it. But it is interesting to see, look, because what might be going on behind the scenes here is for certain types of brands with certain types of digital native consumer funnels, the ROI on esports sponsorships is very strong. And it, in fact, maybe is strong enough to justify doing a wholly owned activation as opposed to an out licensed activation. And it'll be interesting to see if that's what the Shopify case proves out. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in what you said there, William. Particularly, I think they probably ran the math and said sponsoring like a tier 1 org is going to cost X, whereas starting our own org is probably also going to cost X, which there may be some underlying message here that esports orgs are probably overpricing their advertising, right? Their sponsorship packages.
Oh, see, I see it as consistent with the Shopify sort of thing, like do it yourself, right? Like the whole Shopify mentality is build it yourself. I don't know, maybe I'm overreading into the strategy there.
Probably
but
a little bit.
Yeah, but yeah.
Where I come back to is this is probably just the CEO also just being really excited about Starcraft 2. The question I have for you is if we agree this is a marketing play, right? Obviously. Like what's the demographic of the Starcraft 2 esports like audience? My sense was it probably skews older and probably skews more Korean, but I don't know. Like what does that audience look like? Do you have a sense?
Definitely older, because you have to think about it's people who grew up in the RTS Starcraft generation, right? Like, and let's be honest, Starcraft 2 is as storied of a game as the franchise is. It's in Activision Blizzard. We talked about this on the podcast. Stop actively supporting Starcraft. Didn't they make some Starcraft 2? They made some announcement to that effect, I think. So I don't think this is, this isn't like they're announcing a League of Legends LCS team, right? But again, that being said, you're going to walk before you run if you're a company and you're serious, committed to a longer strategy. And I think the announcement tweet seemed to indicate that there was more coming that came from the CEO, right? It was like starting with Starcraft 2, because of course, I think was the language or something around it.
And they hired 3 people, William. Like this is a relatively small expense for a massive company, right? Like Shopify is a huge company. Making 3 extra hires is not.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's rounding, and who knows? Like I said, this is certainly the sort of thing that you could, every year you get so much of your marketing budget, right, to try Hail Mary random plays, and this is certainly one I could see having a massively outsized return if, say, they win a world championship or something. You know what I mean, right? So it sort of makes sense as a play. The interesting thing for me is, okay, does this open up a new class of exit for teams? And that's the thing that I'm thinking about.
Where they'll get bought by their corporate sponsors.
By their corporate sponsors. I'm quite serious. Yeah.
An interesting thought.
I'm quite serious. Like it's a little bit. I mean, I'm sort of exaggerating the case here because I realistically think this is going to happen in mass waves. No, but like, look, if it makes sense for a company like Shopify to start a team, then it might make sense for other companies to acquire a team. Isn't it interesting if sponsorship becomes a vehicle, maybe particularly for less successful higher tier teams or maybe mid-tier teams, that sponsorship becomes a vehicle for owned acquisitions, right? Because again, like we have this notion that companies owning sports teams is unusual, but it's not in Asia. My understanding is also like in Japanese baseball, there's strong histories of corporate ties between companies and and team. Like it goes like there are strong historical examples in the sports market of companies enjoying the exposure of a wholly owned asset like this. And I could see it working in esports, particularly, like I said, if you're doing sort of what I would call the lower tier or the mid tier games where the costs are a lot lower. So you're not burning $50 million to do this,
I mean, there's not a ton of precedents in North America though. Like I'm trying to think of an example like of a company owning a traditional sports team. I don't think I can even think of one.
No, there's not a ton of precedents in North America, but flip side to that, like why does esports have to follow traditional sports, right? Because again, remember, one of the problems with owning traditional sports teams is they're geographically gated. So if you own the Seattle Mariners, that's a sports team, right? Is that a sports team? Tell me that's a sports team.
I mean, you're right. Yes, I think so. Baseball
team. Okay. If you own the Seattle Mariners, let's assume that's a team, and I didn't just make that up. If you own the Seattle Mariners, it's amazing marketing for Seattle, but does it do anything for you in Boston? Probably not. And in fact, does it hurt you in Boston because maybe there's a rivalry there? Like it's actually a potential issue, right? But if you think of some esports teams being maybe more globally differentiated, or at least more Japan geographic, does the case for doing it from a corporate level become stronger? Because now you can say it's not just a regional marketing expense, it's a national or maybe even an international marketing expense. It's just interesting. It's like a fun thing to think about,
Yeah. Like I'm struggling to see the headline, right? Like IBM buys Cloud9,
Well,
to launch the IBM like think guys, or like.
but would it be so I mean, like, I know that sounds crazy right now, but like, would it be so crazy? And it probably, by the way, it probably wouldn't start that way, right? It would probably be like IBM announces strategic investment in Cloud9. I
Yeah.
think you and I could see that headline today, right? And we'd be
Yeah.
like, oh, that's cool. And that's the path this goes down, right? It starts that way.
I mean,
and
it's better than rapper XYZ, if you ask me.
Look, all I know is that I think that this Shopify thing here, there's more to it, regardless of the performance of this particular org and how much this is motivated by passion. I think it speaks to the potential of esports to catalyze and reach digital native audiences, and that maybe the traditional sponsor relationship can be rethought for esports because of some of the unique properties of the medium versus, say, traditional sports. So it's kind of fun. It's a fun thing to think about.
Look, I will just say we at the Business of Esports use Shopify, and it's a good reminder for you guys to go buy Business of Esports merch. Yeah, I like the story, and the CEO of the company is a very savvy guy, right? Love that he's a gamer, hardcore gamer. I'm sure he has bigger ambition with this. It'll be interesting to see how it evolves.
Now, can I, not to stay too
Yeah.
long on this story, but the natural counterpoint to this, by the way, if you understand, is that, like, okay, so you're Amazon, you are concerned about Shopify, you see this happen, you've said gaming is a priority.
Yep.
Is Amazon the next one to make an activation in esports? It's just like own an esports team. It's just fun to kind of
Amazon
knock over
can't
that
just
domino.
do one. If I'm Amazon, right?
Mhm.
If I'm Bezos, especially, right? You're talking about billions, hundreds of billions, right?
Well, it's not Bezos anymore. It's the new CEO, but whoever. Well, not whoever.
Buy
Very
all the
important person.
esports teams. Buy the top 10 and make it your own little league, your own ecosystem. You have all the content now for Twitch. Why wouldn't you buy just the top 10?
I mean, it's an interesting idea. The thing is, I think you have significantly diminishing marginal returns for owning multiple teams for a bunch of reasons, which we can talk about.
But you could see the synergies also.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's different in investing. I think investing, you should spread it around. But I think for ownership, I think I see some potential, John, not the least of which, like, what happens in the CSGO league when all 8 teams are Amazon 1, Amazon 2, Amazon 3, Amazon 4,
I mean,
but
I could see it. I could see it.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. This fun one.
No. Let's move on. Let's talk, because there's lots of big stories this week. And this one actually just dropped today. So very, very current, very relevant here. This one's from the Esports Observer. HP to buy HyperX from Kingston Technology Company for $425 million. The article is very simple here. HP Inc., that manufactures PCs, servers. They also own the gaming brand Omen. They're planning on buying the HyperX division. So it's for those who don't know, HyperX makes like headsets, keyboards, mice, gaming accessories. And it's a division of Kingston Technology, which is a much larger company that produces everything from like memory and SSDs and like huge semiconductor and also like PC accessories company. And so HP is going to buy this. Kingston's obviously going to retain all of their DRAM, flash, SSD products for gamers and enthusiasts. So that Kingston's keeping that. But HP will acquire all of the gaming peripherals under the HyperX brand. William, were you surprised to see this? Is anything here shocking to you? Is the number shocking? Is the partnership? When you think HP, yes, they have Omen, but you don't necessarily like immediately associate HP with gaming.
Yeah, but I'm not. This one to me is more why didn't I predict this coming down the pike type of thing.
Well, we did. I've
We
been
did,
saying
we
now
did, sorry.
for
Yeah.
months and
Mhm.
months.
Yeah, there's going to be more
Hardware
acquisition.
is the place. There's a space that people need to be watching because there's a lot happening there.
But this one specifically, right? Because it does feel a bit like HyperX is a bit orphaned within the Kingston. HyperX, like, you have to be a very consumer-facing brand, and I think of Kingston more as a symbol of quality. You know what I mean? Like, it's more of a corporate level, Staples-esque brand. I don't know if that's fair assumption to
I mean,
make.
Kingston is also
yeah.
like a huge business. Like Kingston, I
Yeah.
think does like 10 billion in revenue.
Oh, wow.
Like, so when you talk about HyperX being acquired for 425 million, you can assume their revenue is lower than that, right?
Yeah,
So like
yeah.
they're not like they're not the sizable chunk of Kingston. Like when you have a company doing 10 billion.
But they're a very known consumer brand, right? Like, that's
It
the
is
first
in
thing,
the
right? Like,
gaming world.
I think it's a good brand. I think it's fair to say HyperX is a good brand. That's the
Yep.
first thing. Then the second thing is, it is true, HP has Omen. They're clearly interested in gaming and gaming related activations.
Mhm.
This is probably the sort of thing where it really doesn't make sense to have, islanded products, right? Like just the PC, just the mouse, right? You really need to start to have an ecosystem. So they probably needed to do something if they were serious about gaming, which you just have to be looking at where the growth is in hardware and stuff today. You probably need to look at trying to complement your ecosystem. You have a choice between build versus buy. And like I said, the price sort of seems, I mean, we don't know the underlying revenues. So, but I doubt these guys were doing 50 million. You know what I mean? Like, it seems like the
They might
price
have been.
seems.
I think they might have been.
You think they might have been, really?
Yeah.
Mhm. I don't know. Either way, I think it seems like a pretty good price to get a brand this good. And I hate to say it, this is such a dumb thing, but I'm going to say it anyway. It helps that it starts with an H. You know what I mean? I'm sorry, but like
Why?
Hewlett Packard HyperX, like, there's just a lot you can do with HP HX. Like, it's just from a, I know it's a
Seriously?
stupid point.
Do you
I
think they
should,
keep the HyperX brand, or do you think it all gets rebranded Omen in the long run?
I don't like this if they don't keep the HyperX brand, to be honest with you, right? Because I
Interesting.
think it's a good brand. Um, and I think there's value to maintaining it. I wonder if they don't segment their gaming offerings, so Omen becomes ultra high end, HyperX becomes more entry level. I wonder if they use it as part of a brand segmentation strategy. But I would be disappointed to see them pay 425 million to rip off the HyperX logo. I think there's more you can do with it.
Here's the question, William. Like, and I was, as I was thinking about this, this sort of stood out to me. If you look at all the big PC manufacturers, right, like the big
Mhm.
ones,
Yep.
you've got HP, okay,
Mhm.
that has Omen.
Yep.
Lenovo has Legion.
Yep.
Dell has Alienware.
Yep.
Right? All the big PC manufacturers currently have a gaming brand, right? Now, what's common to all of them, though, it seems, is they all build laptops and desktops, and they're all
Yes,
pretty
they
good,
do.
right?
Mhm.
But if you look at all of them, all the accessories are total crap, right? Like, no one was rushing out to buy the latest Alienware mouse or the latest Omen mouse, right? They all produce accessories or peripherals, but it's just to bundle with the desktop and
Yeah.
laptop that they're selling you, right? Like,
Yeah.
no one, again, no one's rushing out to buy the latest HP Omen mouse. And I think it's interesting that all of the PC manufacturers made the effort, time, spent building out their gaming brands, but absolutely spent no time on developing solid peripheral businesses,
Yeah.
right? And so when I first saw this, I thought, well, this is dumb, right? HP
Mm.
already had a gaming brand. What do they need HyperX for? But I
Yeah.
wonder if we won't see the big PC manufacturers that have solid gaming brands like now go and acquire peripheral makers so that they're not just bundling a mouse and a keyboard in with the desktop that you bought, but where there's a really separate strong business around peripherals.
Well,
Like,
and
will
that's
we
what
see Lenovo buy Rockhat, or will we see Dell buy Glorious?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
That's sort of what I was saying about it doesn't make sense to be islanded, right? Like, the reality is the best time to get people to buy your peripherals is probably when they're also buying a new computer, right? They're
Yeah.
already writing you a $2,000 check, right? You can convince them to go probably up another $100 for the good mouse. You know what I mean? So probably it's a very good sales conversion. The other thing is it's sort of a holdback, right? Like, The last thing you want is, if you're shopping for Alienware, you to have the customer in the purchase funnel and them either to not buy because it comes with a mouse they don't like, or for them to go leave your purchase funnel and go to another third-party offering to go get the mouse they want, right? So having quality pack-ins is, I think, quite important to the core. And this is total speculation on my part, right? But it seems quite important to the core, because the best thing you want, right, is to sell total all-in kits, right? Like, that's the best thing you want, I think. You
The
would like
difference is the turnover on peripherals is much faster than the turnover on desktops. Someone may buy a desktop once every only 4 or 5 years, but they'll switch mice, every 9 to 12 months.
But well, here's a question: what is the brand loyalty? That's the other thing I was going to ask. Like, is this the sort of thing where if you start on an HyperX mouse, you never leave HyperX? I wonder. I've certainly experienced things where, like, I started with Razer and just everything is now Razer, so I sort of just always look at Razer first, even if I don't end up buying that. I wonder how much the brand loyalty lock-in effect matters here, because again, maybe it's also like the best time to start your peripheral sales channel for the next year's sales cycle is in this, the basically the original moment when you're upgrading all your hardware. I don't know, it's total speculation, but it just strikes me like, look, like, if you're in the business of selling people physical gaming products, there's got to be a lot of synergies for selling a broad line of physical gaming products. Not just the computers, not just the mice, not just the headsets. It's all the ability to bundle, cross-sell, all that stuff has to have good value.
Look, in a perfect world, I think HP Omen, if they had the right team in place, definitely has the resources to go build great peripherals of their own, right?
Yes, yeah.
And so the buy here seems a little bit lazy, but then I look at the price and I go, you know what? Assuming some pretty conservative revenue numbers for HyperX, this seems like a good buy, right?
Yeah.
And so, I like it for that reason for HP. The question becomes, why would Kingston sell this asset?
Yeah.
Right? If it's in a high growth space and you're a 10 billion revenue company anyways, like, why get rid of this? What it's not like you need the cash necessarily. They're also in businesses that are in high growth areas like DRAM and flash and SSDs and all these kinds of things that people are buying more and more of. Why divest this asset, you think?
That's really interesting because, like, it is a bit weird, right? You would think that you would look at this being a beachhead in it, unless it's so different. Like I said, unless they think that so much of this market is marketing led, not performance led. They have some theory like that. And they look at their core strength and they say, look, we're in industries where it's really about performance. It's enterprise solutions. It's heavy scale manufacturing advantages. It's all these traditional things. This is really like a promotions and sponsorship driven industry. That's not our business. Let's find somebody. That story makes sense to me. And I'm not sure if that's the right way of thinking about the gaming hardware market, though. I actually think it's very performance driven, but maybe I'm wrong,
Yeah, I actually don't have a good answer for my own question. Like, I'm not sure I agree with Kingston's move here, and I think they may have let it go probably for too little. And like, they made all the effort to build this brand from scratch. Like, I remember buying HyperX products when it still said like HyperX by Kingston, right? Like, Kingston was part of the branding around it. And they were sort of proud of that. I don't know what they were thinking here, right? Like, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe they think the space is getting so competitive on the peripheral side, and maybe there's margin compression or things like that where they feel like it doesn't make sense for them to stay in the game. I don't know.
It is a bit weird that, like, it's just, you don't normally see successful businesses exiting high growth sectors. That's sort of the unusual thing, right? Because generally, like, I would get it if they were cash strapped, right? Then it might make sense, because it probably is a different type of asset than a lot of the other assets in their portfolio. But like I said, the general rule of thumb is when your business is doing well and you have high growth areas, you don't sell those areas, But I don't know. It's a bit unusual. But like I said, I do I could see this story about core competencies and corporate strengths, and that not fitting with their understanding or their vision for what drives the peripherals market for gaming.
William, let's move on. Let's talk about China here.
Okay.
And we frequently
do it.
talk about Tencent.
Mhm.
This headline here from the South China Morning Post. The headline is TikTok owner ByteDance makes biggest public commitment yet to Tencent video game rivalry with launch of standalone site for Nuverse. The subheadline, let me just read them. It says, the video game market has become hugely lucrative in recent years, with both big tech and high-powered startups aggressively building up their gaming units. Nuverse's previous titles struggled to live up to expectations, but it's only a matter of time before it comes up with a hit game. Now, what I take away from this article is Tencent in China feels like they're running away with the video game business, right? And maybe even globally, some people would say they're running away with the video game business. ByteDance, a huge company in their own right, based in China, right? Makers of TikTok, owners of TikTok, is now saying, sort of publicly, like, we're not going to let Tencent run away with this. We're going to double down sort of on our Nuverse property, which is a gaming property, and we want to go toe to toe with Tencent. Does ByteDance stand a chance in your mind here? Like, are you happy to see Tencent at least having some competition, if only by announcement?
Well, couple things here, buddy. Couple things. So first of all, like, I'd point out that I don't think. First of all, I want to say most optimistic sub-bullet headline ever. It's only a matter of time before they have a hit game. Like, I would call out, like, that's not necessarily true, right?
Yeah.
Like, I can think of plenty of studios where it wasn't only a matter of time; they just never made a hit game. But that aside, look, I don't think there's something that special about Tencent's strategy, from the sense of gaming is a good space, buy good things in gaming. Don't be too concerned about the price, because the market's going to go up so much. You're going to be glad you bought it 5 years from now, regardless. And don't be too concerned about trying to activate big synergies across your investments, because the reality is you don't need to. Again, it's a rising tide boat situation. Just buy good properties and hold them, and you'll succeed. Right. I'm vastly simplifying Tencent. I want to give them a lot more strategic credit than that sounds like they deserve. But fundamentally, the strategy of acquiring good gaming companies probably works and isn't that hard to do. The question that I have is Tencent so far ahead that the economics and the returns of this type of thing, like, are already soaked up because all the best logical acquisition targets are bought? Right? This is not Riot Games. Let's be honest, guys. Like, it's not Riot Games that they're buying, whereas that was what Tencent was buying when they started this thing out. So that's one problem. Another problem with it is Tencent has huge scale in their portfolio. And I imagine there's a ton of synergy amongst being invested very heavily across the space, just in terms of knowing what to buy next, right? I think part of why Tencent looks really good in terms of what they buy is because they're probably hearing from their other investments what's working in the market, what they're using, and that's guiding them to where they need to go next, right? So there's a question of, are they going to be at a disadvantage in terms of deals? And then the other thing is, Tencent is still pursuing this strategy, right? Like, it's not like Tencent said, oh, we're done buying in gaming. So they have to do all of this while Tencent will be buying. And you have to wonder, if you're selling a company, you'd probably want to go to Tencent today for the same price versus ByteDance, because Tencent has more scale and candidly has sort of more of a proven history operating as an investor and a purchaser in the space. So I don't think this is like a clear cut, oh, they win here. But I think it's very smart of them to try. And I think more companies should be trying, because, like I said, I think the Tencent strategy is a good one and it's probably replicable.
Specifically, the article here talks about how a couple of things that I want to point out. One, it says Nuverse, so that's the ByteDance gaming property, right? Nuverse is being led by a former Tencent executive. So they plucked talent from Tencent. Two, they're saying how Nuverse is, or at least ByteDance / Nuverse, is taking a page out of Tencent's playbook, because what they're trying to do is funnel social media traffic, like in this case, TikTok traffic, to create monetization opportunities for the games. And the third thing that they talk about here is that Nuverse has been hiring pretty aggressively, including Tencent talent. But they create in their minds, more hardcore games that require bigger investments but generate, more steady revenues if they're successful. The however is, up until now, Nuverse has basically had no big hardcore successes in the sector. All the successes have been like smaller casual games. And so, like, it's still, to your initial point, it's unclear if they can actually produce a great game. It's unclear if they're going to go acquire great games, but it seems they're putting all the frameworks, people, strategy, thinking in place to mirror and compete with Tencent.
Yeah, look, I mean, they have the money and the resources to do it, probably, right? I mean, there are not many companies that could compete with Tencent. ByteDance probably stands a good chance. The social media angle is really interesting. Um, I don't know. It's just so funny. You're just seeing all these big companies doing gaming now. I mean, it seems like it's the great untapped frontier if you're a conglomerate, because there's so much cross sell and user retention opportunities. I think it's probably the same reason why Amazon wants it, candidly.
So there's an interesting question there, William.
Mhm.
Right? They talk about what was like the original 2-horse race in China. You had
Yep.
Tencent and NetEase.
Yep.
Right? Now you have Tencent, NetEase, ByteDance. Alibaba Group is getting into gaming or is in gaming. They talk about MiHoYo, which makes Genshin Impact.
Yep.
Right? So there are some big now gaming, like there are big gaming players in China that aren't just Tencent. Why don't we see an Activision Blizzard, who's always been very hot and bothered about China, right, come in and buy a MiHoYo or, potentially a Nuverse from ByteDance, or like, why don't we see that partnership, other than the fact that Tencent is an investor in them?
Well, yeah.
they probably,
Also,
they probably couldn't get away with that.
Aren't there legal restrictions with wholly owning, domestic Chinese? I don't know. I think there are legal frameworks around that to prevent you from doing it. But I take the point, which is, why don't you see more active, like, why is Tencent left alone to play in China when there's foreign capital that could be coming in and foreign expertise to counter the play? And it is really interesting to me. And I think the same could be said for a lot of markets, right? Like, gaming seems to have these weird kind of country barriers that I don't necessarily think need to exist, because the hits are very international, right? Like, people play League everywhere. You know what I mean? So it is this weird thing of, like, they seem to treat and behave with some of the advantages of traditional, domestic conglomerates. But I don't think it needs to be that way. And yeah, I would hope at some point you'd see some pretty aggressive strategy plays to open up or to broaden the market reach of these companies in a way that I think makes sense, and more foreign capital coming in could be good here, because there's clearly a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, what I'm going to be looking out for is, does ByteDance start acquiring in the way Tencent has, right? It's clear they want to develop in-house. The question is, are they going to go out and get IP, license IP? Are they going to go and acquire pieces of, hot, like again, I look at it and I go, well, if ByteDance is serious, why don't they go buy the development team that made Valheim?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
It's the Tencent strategy, sort of. And they have the money and get out ahead of it. And the US guys, Activision Blizzards of the world, they're all asleep at the wheel. Like, why not? If you're ByteDance and you're really serious, go scoop up all these teams.
Yeah. Well, it's true. It's a bit different too than, a strategy of, like, it could, like, hey, we're just going to make something to plug in monetization tools to our social media success, versus we're going to operate a diversified gaming portfolio, right? And it could be true that a great way to get attention to the fact that you're doing a little bit of something in games is to say you're competing with Tencent, when really all you're doing is opening an internal studio, to have another monetization angle. I don't know. It's interesting.
I just think there's a perfect tie-up here between TikTok and Valheim. I mean, the amount of Valheim TikToks that I've seen.
Doesn't start with the same letter, Paul, though. Doesn't start with the same letter. They can't do it. Companies are only allowed to acquire other companies if they start with the same letter.
This could be problematic.
Yes.
Yeah, that means your company would not have been acquired.
No, a lot of acquisitions are not allowed. Amazon could not have bought Twitch. Like, it's a huge issue. Yeah.
Is this in the book of esports or no? This is
it's brand marketing 101. This is going
to be DLC content.
Yeah, this is DLC content. Like, the marketing synergies are too overpowering if the companies start with the same letter. You can like Scrabble them. You can Scrabble the logos. You know, like it's too good. All right.
Let's move on to our last story here, William. This is from VentureBeat, and the headline here is Facebook Gaming will host more than 90 community tournaments. Not a hugely like impactful story. There's nothing particularly special about this announcement, William. The reason why I put it on here and what I would love to talk about is in the tech world more broadly, tapping into like small business has been a holy grail that no one has been able to achieve, right? Because you have like millions of them. They're, not all tech sophisticated, right? And to organize at scale and to reach them at scale, it's really hard. I see real similarities with sort of small local community esports tournaments, which I would argue is a very important piece of the esports ecosystem, right? But I see major challenges in like organizing, making it feasible at a grand scale, right? Like, how can every local community who has an interest in putting on a little tournament, right? How can you do that at scale? Is Facebook really the only player in the space that could potentially make this happen at like a nation or global level?
I don't know, Paul. To me, I kind of read this headline as like Facebook raises hand in class for first time in 6 months. Like
No, that's not fair. That's not fair.
That's not fair. You don't think that's fair? Like,
I mean,
no, I like.
If we're picking on Facebook, we better pick on YouTube and their Call of Duty.
Yeah,
numbers.
that's fair. But
those
like,
have been pretty miserable.
But what exactly is the gaming strategy here? That's what I'm struggling with because okay, so you think streaming's important. So you think gaming's important because you have FB.GG and all of this stuff. Then you buy Mixer, right? Now, granted, I don't know how distressed that acquisition was.
A purchase.
Yeah, but you take it, right? Yeah. So you're clearly on this streaming story. That's kind of petered out. There's not really like new Mixer enhancements, new Facebook. Like it sort of just happened and is over. Now here's 90 community tournaments, which feels very out of left field, and also feels like, guys, if you're gonna do this, you need to anchor it with some content. Like do 90 community tournaments and a championship series. You know what I mean? Like it feels very like random, shot against the wall. Like there doesn't feel like any cohesion in the Facebook announcements in terms of how they're building. And even if you thought they were just targeting that specific sector to do well, it feels a very incomplete package of assets to target the sector to do well when you're a company at Facebook scale, right? Like, you know what I mean? And to move the needle for them. So yeah, I just like, I love community tournaments. I think they're incredibly important. I think it's a fantastic sector to be in. I think we're going to see a lot of growth in it, but like I just don't see the coordination here for Facebook, because it's also weird because remember back in the day, they bought exclusive rights to a whole bunch of esports content. Do you remember this? Like, yeah. So it's like the logical thing to me would have been to continue that strategy and then layer in community tournaments around the games you already have and sort of build a deep community roots thing. And that also folds in your streaming platform and the value there. And instead, it's just every time they announce something, I feel like it's just thrown against a wall. It's slapdash.
You don't like sort of the attempt to lock in some like user behavior here, right? Like, because there's a million tournament platforms on the market, right? Like everything under the sun. If you want to host esports tournaments, like I could make a list 10 pages long of all the tournament providers in the esports space today, right? This is a total commodity now. What I think none of them though will likely be able to achieve is this massive scale where we can host, let people discover, let people participate in, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of tiny little tournaments, right? Like where you're talking about maybe a few $100s of prize money with, a dozen participants in local, like in rural Timbuktu, right?
Yeah.
I think in some ways only Facebook could do this. Only Facebook has sort of the pieces to be able to deploy that at scale, because you already have all the people on Facebook.
Really, Paul? Only Facebook has the tools to do this?
Who else can do it today?
Okay, you want me to just start naming people off the top of my head? Because I have a million companies.
Sure,
Discord
go.
would be my number one recommendation for that type of strategy, right?
Hey, hold
Like,
on.
yeah.
The large majority of gamers, of those 2.5 billion gamers,
hmm
are not on Discord today,
Yes, but
right? So
who
like
are
that
you?
little local Smash Brothers tournament with 10 people, like I said, in Timbuktu, you know, they're probably not on Discord, I would
Yeah,
think.
but think I think it's the opposite. Like I think it's like you have to have a level of motivation to register for a tournament. Like probably there's a really high overlap between people who have Discord and who are competitive enough to be playing in there. Like to me, it's like it also goes back to like to me like this isn't where Facebook should be in gaming. Like they should be doing the Candy Crush tournaments. You know what I mean? Like that's where this should
Yeah.
go. Like
I
because
can tell
then
you
what
though,
you're describing does make sense and it works
yeah,
across most of their users, you know?
I can tell you where this system's all being gamed because I've lived this.
Yeah.
Some of my guys who are all, very high level gamers, what they're doing now is they're essentially exploiting these Facebook tournaments where they see like, oh, 20 people entered for a $2,000 prize. It's a bunch of nobodies. Let's just go steal. Like, let's just go win the $2,000, and
Actually
and
very
they enter
interesting.
like
Yeah.
20 of these, right?
Yeah.
So you're right. Maybe Facebook's not the right platform. Maybe they should be doing more Candy Crush tournaments. Um, but I kind of like this direction for them. Let's put it that way. More than trying to be a mixer,
Really?
because Facebook has a like very deep roots in events and like getting people together, and not so
Yeah.
much
Yeah,
in
that's true.
streaming,
And
right? Like,
community driven stuff. Yeah, yeah. I see that. I see that. Yeah, I see that. It's just I think that Facebook is a content aggregation platform and it should be trying to go after the content, which is the video, right? Like I think Facebook fundamentally wants more things that pop up in your feed that are relevant to a younger audience. And what's relevant to the next generation, it's gaming clips and highlights and stuff. Like I think it's a big miss for them to see that area of content, you know? Like and
yep,
Facebook clearly knows the importance of this. Like they're not willing to let messaging go, right? They're not willing to like they understand the value of owning certain elements of interactivity and meeting and like why how you would let streaming go from that portfolio. Like I think the Facebook streaming strategy is the one that makes the most sense. It just hit a lot of headwinds. It turned out it was harder to do than they had realized, and maybe that's why they're pivoting to something that's maybe a little easier and maybe where the scale is more powerful, because as you said, if you can broadcast a community tournament to 2.4 billion people, you can probably fill it up.
yep.
Mhm.
Look, it's an interesting. I'm still look. I'm not a big Facebook fan, but I am bullish on their potential in gaming. I would love to see more integration with Oculus, but I like this direction. I like this sort of community gaming and community tournament direction because again, I think like it's I think it's a difficult business to be profitable, to make profitable, right? Like if you're a private business, private startup, you're not
Mm,
Facebook, and you say we want to go solve this problem of community gaming, right? And allow people to host tournaments with $500 prize money. That's a tough business. That's a really tough business. You need massive scale because the dollars involved are so small, right?
mm, mm.
And so it deters people from trying to build that, and it's unlikely people will be successful building that. And so I kind of like Facebook, even if it's not a major revenue driver for them, filling that void because I think it's an essential part of the ecosystem.
Well, we'll see what happens, but I still think, and I'll double down on this, I still think the right place for Facebook to be is in the platform for you to stream to your buddies. I still think that is the right place because that's always been the relevant audience for Facebook. It's broadcasting to your friends. Streaming is huge now. The reality is, if you go and create a Twitch channel, nobody cares, right? You're not going to get random people to follow you. But what you might be able to do is if you have 200 friends who are gamers, maybe 5 or 6 will watch you while you're playing. That and then who knows where that to me still feels like the most natural place. And they had such good integration with Activision Blizzard games and like I don't know, it feels very strange that hill has dried up for them because I still think I hear everything you're saying about community
Yeah, but
tournaments. I
who's dominating what you just described exactly?
Discord.
Discord.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Like
That's exactly
streaming to
right.
my 5 friends. I mean, I do this all the time on Discord.
I know. It's observed behaviors I see in Discord that are making me think it's even more important for Facebook to capture this.
Got
right?
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
William, on that note, thank you so much. That's the end of this podcast.
It's a great one. I had fun.
Just a reminder to our viewers, please go leave those 5-star ratings and reviews. Tell your friends about the podcast. Don't miss the Wednesday night live streams. It's our after show. We do it at 8:30 Eastern time. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, on YouTube, Business of Esports, Biz Esports on Twitter, Biz Esports on Instagram, Biz Esports on TikTok. William does dances every single day on TikTok. They're great. And make sure to go buy the book of Esports because show your support for his TikTok dancing. On that note, William, thanks so much. Thank you guys for listening.